Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sunday Special. And today we're joined by, again, Helen Chorley, Adam Lawrence, and Jay Howard with visuals today.
We have Jay back, yay!
How lucky do you all feel? This could have...
The viewership has gone up 700% already. 700%.
They would call it pure curbside appeal, Adam. This is
There's something raw about it, Jay. That's what I've always liked. Raw.
I was just saying that Jay should go with video because of all of the books behind, and now people know where all the fancy words come from.
I know if I zone out during this session, it's because I'm like zooming in on Jay's like book list and seeing what I can add to my list.
well.
See the way he moved it there is proof it's not just a dodgy background. It's definitely a real thing.
I mean, the problem is the reality with this bookshelf is that 90% of it is my wife's. And the other 10% is Abby's. All my books are upstairs, ready to go into the new office. So. There's some really good collections here, but
I've got more books. Yeah. Oh, nice, really good. Okay, well, as usual, every week we start with Adam's supplement, and this week there's some good news.
Well, the good news kind of went in inverted commas, I'm afraid, because I've kind of front run where the inflation number, the CPI number anyway, is going to be at, and then had a bit of a fall on my sword moment, really, because it's one of those slight epiphanies of realizing that I've fallen into one of those traps that I've known that everybody else are falling into and been part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And I've spent too much time really talking about CPI because that's the number that gets into the news, it's the number that everybody knows at the moment. Not many people know where the retail price index has been, for example, which, of course, for many years was the arbiter of inflation. And then the consumer prices index came along, which was more accurate and also happened to be nearly always lower than the retail price index, which may or may not have favoured the government in times of high inflation. Not many people know that the RPI has been over 14% in this cycle, and is still running very hot at the moment. But that's not the real number either, to be honest. The real number, and the number that I should have been focusing on, the number that the forecasting really needs to be focusing on, is what's called the core inflation, which strips out the volatile stuff. So I was taken by the US figures this week and the release. US CPI is now down to a mere 4.6, which is great news, really, for the US government. The core inflation is 4.7. So what that means is why is core higher than CPI? Because the volatile bits that have been stripped out when you get back to the core have come down quite a bit in terms of fuel. Obviously, it's measuring over a 12-month period. Does this mean there might be some normalization in terms of energy? Prices are right down. If you look at where the price cap actually is now in the UK, it's much lower than it was last October, although we didn't feel it because the government absorbed all of that. But really, core is where we need our focus, because core, at a really simple level, is telling us how entrenched is inflation in the economy, right? And our core is 6.2 at the moment. The forecasts are suggesting that it's going to fall to about 5.7 next month. That's the one I've got a real issue with, and I can't see that really being the case. I think it's still going to start with a 6 because of all the stuff that went up in April last year. But CPI, it does look nailed on. The consensus forecast for CPI, which is it's 2 weeks before we find out, is actually 8.6. So the likelihood of that being in double digits is exceedingly limited because the forecasters are never that far out. I wouldn't be surprised personally if it still started with a 9, although they're rarely that far out. And of course, they have some sophisticated mathematical models. But most of this calming down that we'll inevitably see, certainly pushed by the government, who've made promises around CPI specifically, and of course may well be used as leverage in some of the strike negotiations and stuff that are still ongoing. A lot of that is really just due to the fact of between March and April 22, there was a big hike in prices in a whole number of things. And now we're measuring from April 22 as our base rather than March 22 as our base. So April to March 22, the 1 month gap was actually 2.5% in 1 month, which is very, very, very significant. But when we start measuring from the higher base, it means our prices haven't gone up that much since then. A mere 8.6 if the forecasters are right, 9% if my newer forecast is right. So the apology really is not doing what I pride myself on trying to do, which is not falling into the same traps that a lot of the rest of the circus does around a lot of this stuff. And hopefully I'll make up for it, and hopefully have made up for it with some actionable insights over the past couple of years to cope with all of this stuff. We've got quite a few metrics of interest coming out. Next week we get the unemployment figures. That will be probably too much read into it because you can't really read too much from 1 month's figures. There's been a real bunch of surprises in that thus far, but I've got in the back of my mind at the moment what the Octopus CEO said about AI and replacing 250 customer service staff with AI and increasing the customer satisfaction scores. I'm still sort of marveling week on week about how inaccurate some of the things that come out of ChatGPT can be. But of course, the pace of improvement is pretty blinding. And is this the time when we see the first, the stuff we were talking about in the 1970s, or our ancestors, hopefully, were talking about in the 1970s, in terms of replacement of humans? The nullification of some of the and I think it may. I heard this on a podcast this week, and I thought back to when I last worked in a corporate environment. The place had a policy to recruit people from within first of all before you advertised externally, and I was asked to recruit some people into a team, and I put that out to the wider business, and I was absolutely stunned how many of them had not only undergraduate degrees but master's degrees and were working in the call center at the time, right? And they were certainly on paper looked more capable of just working in the call center. So you've got this very large pool nowadays, of course, thanks to the likes of Mr. Blair and his targets on how many people should go to university. You've got this very large pool of people, some of whose jobs are at real risk in the really near future, right? And I'm talking like 2 to 3 years here, not a longer time period than that. And what you'll still have is a massive shortage of people who can lay bricks and do the other things that we're maybe 20 to 30 years away from seeing some real progress in, like 3D printing houses and things like that. I don't feel, the world doesn't feel like that's going to be happening at a deliverable price, at a workable and scalable price, at too much in the very near future. Whereas, Moore's law, the old, processing power doubles every year and it halves the size it takes to do that processing or whatever. If you apply that to AI and maybe beef it up a bit because the pace of change seems so incredible. I mean, what's really blown me away so far is not the people drafting legal documents, because as I said, they're about 30% wrong from what I can see. It's the design stuff where they can come up with these just insane, make me a new Tesla with a mirrored paint finish or whatever, and they just look brilliant. They look like they've been the product of 12 months work by the design team, and then it's been done in 15 seconds by a machine. That stuff's really quite scary. And of course
what I find with ChatGPT as well, like if it produces, if you think might produce like wrong content, you just ask it to check it and act as a critic and basically point out the things that don't work, and then it will do that, and then it will ask it. You ask it to implement those changes, and then it does. Within a few questions, you can have an amazing output that's been critically reviewed by several professors or whatever.
We'll have to eye your future articles with deep suspicion, Piotr, in this case. But yeah, and don't get me wrong, I found it brilliant for. So let's say you want to write a method statement for something. You know, it does you the skeleton, it does you the draft, it does you the bare bones. Write me a heads of terms for a transaction. I think the dangerous thing is. Well, one of the dangerous things is the problem with the world we live in these days is there's lots of people who will just type the question in and paste the answer like it's gospel truth. And if it replaces the human knowledge, because the thing is, this doesn't get rid of the people and the need for people, because people then need to watch machines. It's like robots in the factory. People still need to watch machines. People still fix robots when robots break down. We're way away from robots fixing robots when robots break down, right? We just need fewer people. Now, we could have had this, well, we couldn't, obviously technologically we couldn't, but we could have had this conversation in 1748 or something and been quite concerned about what's going to happen to all the agricultural labourers who are not going to have any jobs anymore because of the oncoming industrial revolution and the invention of the steam engine and whatever else, right? And in reality, it created a middle class, and it created a much better standard of living, although the journey to get there was not necessarily smooth. So there's a big opportunity for repurposing of people, whereas things like universal basic income exist in the background to deal with the nuclear waste of actually we couldn't repurpose all these people, and now these people with a degree in, I'm not going to denigrate any particular degree, of course, but X, Y, or Z, let's say, suddenly find it provides them no edge whatsoever, and they haven't got something it's a bit like if you want to start a high street shop today, you want to be internet proof, right? Careers advisors and young people today need to be thinking, I need a job that's a bit more AI proof. And it's the biggest threat to the service industry, we've ever seen, which is really, really challenging and really interesting. But I'd love to know what you guys think about that, to be honest.
I've been fixating on your statement from the or your paraphrasing from the CEO of Octopus Energy about removing people from a call center and putting a robot in there. I don't know a single human being alive or who has been alive for the last 25, 30 years that picks up a call to a call center where you cannot speak to a human being. We have to keep push 2 for this, push 6 for that. All of my emotional mental breakdowns and throwing things at walls is when I've been on a call to a service center for 4 hours, not being able to speak to a human being. I don't know how out of touch a CEO has to be to comprehend how pointless that statement is.
I think
funny.
You mean completely different things, because what you're experiencing is the barrier to get to a human being because they're enough, or like you just need to. But it's like a barrier to get to a human being. Well, and I think it wouldn't be the same because it would be actually robot answering the phone straight away and giving you answers within seconds, giving you circumstances.
And that's why the satisfaction scores have gone up, right? That's the thing. But of course, the broader conversation is they've gone up from being completely in the toilet to slightly less than in the toilet, because you're already. I mean, it's funny because when I'm talking about the last assignment I had in corporate some years ago, my brief was customer experience and improving the customer experience of the customers of the business. And one of the things that was right at the top of our agenda in our team was get rid of the IVR, the voice recognition, because it adds no value whatsoever. And there are a number of examples, and there have been for years, where the CEO has understood the people and just gone, just get rid of this, it's awful. And the satisfaction scores have gone through the roof. And interestingly enough, although people don't necessarily think like this, there's a gigantic correlation with business performance and the satisfaction scores of your customers. An incredible correlation, with some of the best businesses in the world having the most satisfied customers. I mean, Aldi has the most satisfied customers of any supermarket, or it did the last time I looked at the numbers. Now, I understand why people might be a bit surprised about that, but when you think about it, if you go on TripAdvisor and look at the number one restaurant in an area, for a start, TripAdvisor uses a really broad catch-all for what a restaurant is, right? Quite often it can be like a greasy spoon, for example. Why are people satisfied? Because they get a big portion, or they get a bit of banter behind the till. It's about expectations versus delivery, right? And that's why when you look at certain big luxury brands, for example, they're desirable. But you tell me if you haven't ever, and I'm not someone, as you can tell, who buys a lot of luxury brands, right? But when I have had experiences with them, and generally speaking, they have been at or below expectations. Now, that's because expectations are so high. And that's why their brands are so valuable to them, because part of the value of a Louis Vuitton bag is other people see you have a Louis Vuitton bag, not what a great bag it is compared to this bag you can buy in Costco that's 1/10 of the price, right? So expectations versus reality versus perception is a pretty incredible triangle to consider in these situations.
Do Costco sell bags?
Get
myself down there. That's my kind of price point on bags. So
anything. Costco is the one shop. I don't know if it's a primarily male thing, right? But quite a few guys that I know are like, I bloody love Costco, because the thing is, you can go in there and you can see things. They've got their own branded stuff, like any supermarket, but their own branded stuff is pretty decent quality. But there's also stuff you see and think, right, I've never heard of this brand. Of course, a lot of it is American, so you're not necessarily on board with the brand anyway. But you have this level of trust in Costco that if it made it into Costco, it must be good. And honestly, I think don't get me wrong, I've bought some unnecessary purchases in there up with the very, very best of them, right? But how much poor quality stuff have I ever bought in Costco? Nearly none. In many years.
Bedding from Costco. The bedding is really good. Just saying.
There you go. That's their own brand, isn't it? Kirkland Signature. That's their brand. And but then Costco has an interesting model where really the cost of delivery of everything is about break even. The only reason they make any profit is because they charge a membership fee. So their membership fee is their profit, pretty much.
Wow.
So they're not scared to spend. They're not scared to pay a bit more for something because they know that their customer base will respond favourably to it.
So
Very interesting.
I like to mark these places down by how good the eats are. So I love going to IKEA because I like getting a big plate of meatballs, mashed potatoes, gravy, the jam, this, that, and the other. I also like the pizza and the hot dogs from Costco, right? You kind of, I want to go Costco, you don't have to go to that place to eat the food because as you're walking around, they're going to stuff your belly with everything that you can think of. But I remember going there and I was like, I could buy a hot tub. And then I walked around the corner. I was like, I could buy some Levi jeans. Then
I went in for a hot dog. I came out with a hot tub. Yeah, absolutely.
They have the most cocaine-like addictive substance that I've ever seen sold over the across the counter, which is these little pretzels. It's a giant tub like this, maybe a kilo tub of these pretzels, which are stuffed, absolutely stuffed to the brim with peanut butter. Now, you may think that I don't know why you would say that's have one. Just try and open the tub and eat just one. You can't. It's never been done. There's study after study, peer-reviewed back data that you can't sit down and eat a single one of those. Impossible.
So the Pringles of pretzels. Once you pop, you can't stop.
I mean, we should probably state this is not a paid advertisement for Costco or Aldi or Octopus Energy, but
their PR teams will be in touch for sponsorship purposes, though. Hopefully, so that'd be nice.
We've got a comment from Shazad Nassar, and says, with time, the demand for traditional laborers, craftsmanship will go up. I think it's already gone up, and I think actually this is one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys, because I know after Middle Ages, when the print was created and people got access to books, suddenly there was more access, easy access or cheap access to to read words and education and things like that. And people suddenly started, like, there were the Renaissance ages where people were actually really creative and they got into a lot of creative things. What do you guys think, like, with, because like if we get all our basic needs met, it's going to be much easier for people to focus on art, on sport, on the kind of things that we rarely focus
on world peace and solving global hunger and
world
because,
peace.
I mean,
Oh, you don't focus on world peace. World peace is there. Like if you focus on actual things that
well,
make
no,
people fulfilled.
I was
But
extrapolating out. I was extrapolating out. I think one of the things that I think is the easiest thing to see if you're not scared of what AI what the fear mongering that AI produces is if you have a job that requires you to do all of this like wide scope stuff, it takes a long time. A lot of it can be duplicated, replicated, standardized, but it isn't. Then what the AI does is it shrinks that purview down. It does all of the extraneous stuff, and it just means it should make people more efficient and more effective. It should mean that with the aid of AI, rather than the replacement of mankind, with the aid of AI, you become more streamlined, more efficient, more effective. Now, that may mean that there is several roles or jobs or fields that are less demanding of human interaction or human guidance or oversight. But then you do have that step fall down of maybe you're right, Piotr. There does go into more kind of craftsmanship, more arts, music or whatever, and that maybe that's something that has a secondary impact.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Because the thing is, society's not gone that way. Society's gone the way of start with the invention of the washing machine, if you like, right? Liberated a lot of women at the time, enabled the workforce to expand massively. What really happened then in reality is the one breadwinner household became the two breadwinner household, and now the two breadwinner household struggles more in average than the one breadwinner household is to get on the property ladder. I mean, the figures bear all that out. Not only that, but then the major breadwinner, now whether they be male or female, even though now females between 21 and 29 are earning more money on average than males are, then works harder, even more hours than they ever have done. Not necessarily in any way the same physical toll on their body as when the main breadwinner worked down the mine or whatever, right? But because physically they can do more hours of work, they work even more, and it hasn't really led to. So before we just fire up Kumbaya, I'm a bit concerned that's not the way things will go, and we might end up in a place where we need an AI tax, robot tax style thing, which has been proposed in the past. I think Bill Gates is one of the early proponents of it, because what you got here is a chance for the top 0.0001% to grab even more of the cake than they've already got. And overall, that probably doesn't lead to good societal outcomes, because although you have the giving pledge and stuff like that, and you do have the outliers like Gates and Buffett have given away, 50+ billion between them and whatever, we still have to wait an awful long time because they have access to the best healthcare. So before they pass on, they're going to be about 133 or something like that. So I'm not sure we can necessarily. I'd love to think we get to that place, but if you look at the reality, whenever there's cuts going on in society, it's cuts to the arts, it's cuts to all those things you just talked about that happen first, because ultimately our capitalist systems don't want to fund things through taxation. They want to fund things through the third sector, philanthropy, and anything that doesn't make the downside of capitalism. If it doesn't make money, nobody thinks it's worth putting any money into, unless they've got a particular passion. And yeah, you might have more billionaires on the back of this. Will you have more arty billionaires? Not sure. Not convinced, guys, I'm afraid.
That's what concerns me with what Piotr said. Like, if there's more time, if this makes life kind of more efficient, streamlined, so there's less, like triviality that you have to do yourself. So yes, on the one hand, and some people will be more, focused on art, creative, like life enhancing, societal, communal, world enhancing things, and the rest of them will just watch more Kardashians. So I don't know. Are we going like that, or I don't know?
I mean, it's definitely divergent for society, and that forget your Skynet T1000, Miles Bennett Dyson, whatever. I'm not too bothered about that argument. But the societal fabric danger, I do think, is a very, very legit argument. And we're starting from a place where inequality's been heading in what is socially deemed the wrong direction already. So our start point is pretty ropey, especially in the US, right? Yeah. Now, luckily, we probably get to see what happens there, first of all, and act accordingly. But if we then have central bank digital currencies that have an element of social credit built into them, how divisive or cohesive do you think that will be? Well, if you're not a good boy or girl, then we'll just lock your currency out, guys. There's no problem there. No problem there.
And the real kicker is, what is the dynamism behind what is right and wrong? Do you know what I mean? Like, you may think this is absolutely right. Someone else will disagree, and there goes your social score. Or it may not be somebody else. It may just be the government or whatever kind of...
Mate, look at some of the laws they've tried to pass in Scotland when the motorhome money launderers were still in charge. You know, it's unbelievable what people can say or think is right and wrong in terms of, the one thing that the States, I have a lot of issues with the US culture, and I'd never want to live there under any circumstances. But I do think when it comes to free speech, I'm glad they've got people like Elon going to bat for free speech, because the strength that is needed in that debate at the moment is absolutely intergalactic. And that's, in my opinion, as you say, Jay says quite correctly, subjectively, but in my opinion, that stuff's been going in the wrong direction and needs to be fought, because otherwise, what is going to make us different from the machine? Because the machines won't have free speech, remember. There'll be all sorts of limiters. And I always think about it like, in RoboCop, when he has his directives that he has to follow, like serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law. Directive 4 is classified, but of course what Directive 4 is you cannot arrest any senior member of the corporation that invented RoboCop, right? Yeah. And that there's look, RoboCop's already happening right now. Yeah, that's the thing. But will they even serve the public trust, protect the innocent, and uphold the law? That's the question.
So I think we should go into kind of bringing this into a bit. How does it affect property? Because our chat is called Sunday Special Property Chat. And I think some people might be scratching their head thinking how AI affects property. But I think it's pretty obvious in a sense that,
your tenants, right?
What they do, how their lives are being affected, how they pay for the properties, how they use properties, how all this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got indirect and direct, haven't you? You think about the in your own property businesses, as and where you've got to communicate with customers, or as and where you might have to communicate with auction houses or people who hold information about a property. You might be replacing a current person with AI. You might be talking to AI instead of talking to a real person. So you've got to think about that interaction either way. Hopefully the satisfaction scores of tenants will go up if good organizations save money on customer service and get a really smart robot which can solve some of the really tricky, because being a property manager is not easy. The difficulty is the tenant doesn't really know always what they're reporting. Sometimes there's tenant fault, much as nobody wants to ever hear that, but that's the reality of it. And you can't necessarily educate and change someone's behavior. The diagnosis that comes over is weak, incorrect, or wrong. You haven't got sufficient information. If it can change a lot of all of that, that's a game changer for asset management on the residential side of things, I think, as long as those things are still actioned. But like you then say, the indirect results, what happens to your tenants who were the ones who work in the call centres? And where are they at? Is there a significant level of unemployment that the government needs to spend an incredible amount of money in creating new AI-proof jobs, or expanding industries where they are potentially AI-proof? Because will it mean that the rich people don't want massages and gym services and stuff like that? I don't think it will. No, I think there'll be more of that, right? Some of this free time, there'll be more wellness. So health, well-being, wellness, doctors, nurses, etc., etc. I don't see too much danger in that department, although the skill level's going to be tested, right? But sticking with call center operatives, that's where the big danger might be. Consultants, will there be? Can an AI consultant now do the work of what was probably already being outsourced to somewhere in Asia? I don't know. I don't know where it can. Will they create a fantastic slide deck in 12 minutes to put your end of project presentation together? Yeah, they probably will. They probably will. It's probably better than anything you've ever seen. So I think that's sort of those are the immediate sort of impacts. Is it going to be able to build houses? Like I say, I don't see it at any point in the particularly near future that threatens us.
Sorry, Adam, let me just stop you for a moment, because you got a comment someone from Josh saying, am I the only one who can hear only every other word Adam is saying? I can hear Adam okay, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can as well.
Yeah, if someone let us know if it's a problem or not, we'll see what we can do about this, or if it's just Joe.
Just need to make sure that Joe isn't in a low or high reception breaking barrier area.
Maybe something, yeah. Sorry, Adam. I just wanted to address this.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Good stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think there's those consequences we've got to consider first of all before we get too carried away with all of it. And I think one of the big dangers, I think, is the pace at which we might have to cope with some of this stuff is difficult, and probably a pace that we haven't dealt with before.
Adam, you'd like to hear that. You're loud and clear.
Thank you, Lee.
I think the biggest risk to property at the moment is there's more of a call for corporates to take up ownership of lots of property and managements of lots of tenants. And there is a big swing against landlords. And you're seeing a lot of news outlets covering this, debating this topic on a regular basis in terms of being forced out for costs or access or whatever. And the call for the government to be taking back government-owned housing and or to create more government-owned housing. So those are the biggest risks to investors as SMEs or mum and pops or wherever you put yourself in that pyramid. Those are the biggest ones, I think, because the government doesn't have as many barriers to entry as a mum and pop's SME, and neither do the corporates because they have scale and leverage and utility that you can't realistically do as a small scale operation on a large scale portfolio.
But on the flip side, Jay, the thing that protects people, certainly in lots of parts of the country, I think, is the cost for the local authorities to deliver more housing, let's say, which has been a big failing since 1980, as we all know, right? Or even maybe a little bit before that, although they did build quite a bit of social in the 70s, is that the cost of delivery is insane compared to the rents they can charge. And you're talking about yields that are, at the moment, in the world we now live in, dramatically below the government bond yield. So you can't make a case, an economic case, for borrowing money at 4% and investing in something that yields 2%, right? You can't do that. And we've never lived in a world where there's been so much pressure on the amount of debt that already exists, right? So that tends upwards over time. So that leads the government, or local authority, central government, whoever, into the secondary market, right? And then competing in the secondary market. Now, imagine if they were, and the absolute blow up that would cause to house prices, because there'd be, quite frankly, people with limited amounts of skill buying them from people with more skill in the private sector selling them to them, and the prices would shoot up overnight by an amount that would have a really negative impact on the people who are trying to get on the ladder for the first time in some of these investment areas. And I made the point today in the supplement that a lot of these 100% mortgages, right? The only place they're going to have any sort of impact on the pricing is the cheapest parts of the country where the yield already is, because mathematically that has to be the case. If you've got to borrow at 5.5%, there's no point your rental that yields less than 5.5% being bought by you, because it's not going to save you any money every month. And if it doesn't save you any money, you probably haven't got the money to do it, right? That's the thing. So that's the problem and the perversity of releasing a 100% mortgage just as the interest rates have become. It's almost taking the pee out of people who haven't been able to save a deposit, because if it had been done, as I've said before, over the course of at any point in the last 10 years, other than this point, if it had been done, it could have really helped some people. You know, how much money could they have got out? And the thing is, even from a commercial perspective, how much money could the Skipton have got out the door at 3.5% when the cost of funds was 0.5%? Whereas now the cost of funds is 4.5%. They want it out at 5.5%, which probably isn't a high enough risk premium for the people they're going to lend it to. But hey, listen, who said I should be the head of credit risk? You know, it's just nuts, right? It's absolutely nuts. And
Exactly.
I think, and if you introduce the might is the wrong word, the financial muscle and unsophistication of your average local authority deployment department into the local property markets, I don't know what they can do apart from lease off private landlords. I don't know what they can do, because remember, a lot of them, their balance sheets are terrible, and a lot of stuff they already do. The new trick these days is get the stuff off the balance sheet. Well, guess what? Do you know what? If you try and do that in a private company, do you know what happens in the end? The thread unravels and people go broke. And you can't fix a problem of, oh, the accounts don't look very good. Oh, well, this is off balance sheet, so don't worry about it. Still money, still flowing out the door from somewhere, still problematic.
Yeah,
you know, so they need to be. They could do a use.
Written all over it, isn't it? Off balance sheet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all bit of they're effectively shadow banking, aren't they? They're shadow banking at the local governmental level, and you know it will lead to tears, because ultimately they haven't got there's a reason why bankers get paid a lot of money. They're bloody clever at making lots more money for the banks that they work for, right? That's not the case in the local authority last time I checked. So unless they suddenly employ some very entrepreneurially minded, creative, brilliant problem solvers who can do deals with, who start, you know, instead of trying to build houses at a cost of 250 grand that are only going to be worth 150 grand by the time they're built, if instead maybe they focus on buying distressed deals from people and repurposing their own buildings and making most of the land they already own and whatever else they might be able to do, and or doing some of these things that you see talked about and sometimes done in some areas where they give a business rates break for the first, some of the stuff they're talking about doing in the Freeport areas. You know, here's a break. There's a really, really tiny weeny example, but there's a shop empty at the moment locally in Solihull, and it was a sub 3,000 square foot, well under 3,000 square foot to be fair, convenience store in a little parade in an area where there's plenty of money there, and there's already a nice high-end hair and beauty place that's double fronted, that's expanded over the years, a bigger supermarket, a Chinese takeaway, a chip shop, what else is there, an estate agency, and that's maybe an opticians or something like that, and a pharmacy, right? All good, solid, local stuff businesses. They'll be steady as you like. Yeah, this unit that's empty is £42,000 rent, and bear in mind, you know, I don't live in London. You know, this is the Midlands, right? 42k rent, 13.5k business rates. You know, it's going to be 1,500 quid a week probably by the time you've paid utilities to even open the doors. So what sort of part of your, you know, you need to be taking 15 grand a week plus in a business to make that interesting and worthwhile. And it just doesn't look viable. But the problem is everybody's at the table wanting their piece of the pie. And it's like, well, in that case, people will just sit back, not particularly interested. And what will happen, you know? So if we don't apply some of this logic to, you know, to some new building or repurposing of building in terms of incentives that we're led to believe the Freeport areas are going to get, we're going to need that in the rest of the country, apart from anything else. Otherwise, we're going to have a really interesting dynamic on our hands within a few years, I think. But that's the problem with inflation. Things go up so quickly that everybody wants more, even when retail rents, for example, have not inflated. They've been coming down for the last 15 years, in reality. Rant over.
Solid rant. When Piotr said, let's bring this back to property, he wasn't expecting this.
I knew something like that will come.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in council housing. So the first 4 places I lived in were all local authority, council owned and managed places. And 3 of the 4 were on council estate, so kind of West London way. And there were pros and cons to that. A pro was my mother was a single mother, needed housing accommodation. She had 2 boys, and it was fit for purpose. But there, there's a lot that's said about private landlords, and things that like mold and repairs and this, that, and the other. If you were to replace every SME landlord with a local authority, your issues with those things multiply by 10. One time we had a hole in the roof for 9 months. We had a plastic bag kind of gathering rain for a while. And you call up the helpline and this, that, and the other, and it just goes round and round and round. Or someone will come out and look at it, and then they'll requisition the work, and then it gets delayed, it gets pushed back. Once, I think we'd been staying somewhere for about 7 years, and they decided they were going to put a new kitchen in, which basically meant that they'd obviously gone out somewhere and procured a box standard kind of kitchen, and the kitchen didn't fit. So they just started cutting bits in half. So it's, I get the feeling, people are against people making money, or the wealthy, or the haves and the have-nots, and then this, that's, and the others. And, there's a huge push for everything to become more societal and more along the labor side, or, the
social justice, I think, is the stated new Labour objective, wasn't it?
Yes, but I mean, I grew up to a certain extent in that, and it does it work better than what we have now? No. Is what we have now perfect? No. Is what we had back then perfect? No. But it's these ideologies where people are like, oh, well, we'll go and do this. Okay, well then what's the result? Because the thing with these ideologies, especially in housing and in understanding money and wealth and things like that, is that everyone has it has to be a counterpart to what we have now. So in order for it to work, it has to be the opposite of what we have now. You find most of the arguments is, oh, well, it's not fair now, so let's just do the complete opposite.
Confucius, he say the grass is greener, Jay. That's what it boils down to, isn't it, really?
Yeah, well, I'm especially for Marxist socialism, which seems to be a heavy push at the moment in housing, and if you're thinking about your tenants, specifically being able to afford rent, afford housing, things like that. At the moment it goes into socialism, then it's designed to put everybody in this bracket here. It's supposed to flatten that. And
apart from the people who are running the socialist regime who still live in the castles, it just rebalances who gets the fast cars and the rest of it, doesn't it?
Well, it removes the need for a middle class. It removes the need for entrepreneurship. It removes the need for people that are advancing technologies, or people that are striving to create a better life, a better world. What it does is that flattening of that triangle, that pyramid. It's a depression line where it depresses everyone and everything. And people will say that's fair, and there is an element of fairness to it. Everybody has exactly the same, and nothing more and nothing less. But it is a stagnator to human growth and the future that I don't think anyone actually understands. Because as much as everyone who is on that side of things is like, oh, well, people will still want to exceed. No. Have you heard of this thing called quiet quitting? You heard of this?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
appalling, right? This is appalling. So you're doing a job that you hate, you're not motivated by it, you're not interested in it, blah, 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 blah. So what you do is you do less, if not the absolute minimum, to engage in your role. It's tantamount to theft, essentially. You're taking a wage and you're not prepared to put in the work and effort to earn that in a legitimate sense. Anyway, so and what people don't realize is everybody is motivated by money. They just don't want to think about it. You want to go on that holiday? Well, you have to be motivated to get the money to do that. You want to buy that house? You have to be motivated for the money to do that. You want to have dinner this evening? You have to be motivated to get the money, to buy the food, to make the dinner. There's no other way that society works. This isn't even capitalism. This isn't even a democracy-backed capitalist environment. This is socialism as well. The only reason that society works isn't just a free market. It's the movement of money, materials, trade, and blah, and blah, and blah. And it shocks me that people think it could work in any other way. Not saying
it doesn't even
correct, but yeah,
it doesn't even need to be as dirty as all of that, though, does it? Because even for people who've got money who carry on work, but there's a lot of take Rishi Sunak, let's say, right? Why does he bother to get out of bed in the morning to be the prime minister? It's not because of the money, right? It's not because of some gigantic conspiracy to stop non-dom status being abolished, because no one in the Conservative Party was ever going to do that anyway, right? He works for less than he pays in tax a year, the man, and then gets criticised for what he gets paid in tax. He does it because status. He does it because of power. He does it maybe a bit because of ego. But overall, it seems to me the world's a better place for having a Rishi Sunak in place than a Liz Truss. If anyone wants to disagree with that, I look forward to hearing from you directly. But you've got an extremely able person who doesn't need to think about any of those things, but the money and the title and the power give him part of his raison d'etre, which is, given that he doesn't seem to me to be a complete sociopath, unlike some of the former recent prime ministers that we've had, is probably a bloody good thing, So the problem is, when you discuss it, you sort of, skated along the borders of individualism versus collectivism there, haven't you? And the thing is, a lot of the problem with the left-hand side of the argument, as I see it characterised these days, is, number one, they don't really go back to the history books to look at what Marxism and communism did to various countries and death tolls and all the rest of the things that are self-evident in some of those regimes in terms of very, very poor allocation of resources. And of course, as an economist, I have a fundamental problem with that, as well as a moral one, apart from anything else. But that doesn't mean that the answer then, and that, the left tends to collect together and blame the government for everything, whereas the right tends to put all of the onus on the individual to do absolutely everything, even when some of those individuals have started a long way back in life, have got disabilities, have got genuine reasons to be claiming benefits, which they ideologically disagree with, right? And the thing is, you then sort of not far away from going full Peterson, who would be on the individualistic side, but would be mischaracterized as a conservative, really, because his real point is there isn't anything else you can do apart from control what you're doing. So don't sit and worry so much and blame society for everything. You do you at the individual level, because that's the bit you can control, which of course is simply logically correct, and you can't disagree with it. But it gets mischaracterized as, oh, that means I can't whinge and protest about, just stop oil, just stop breathing, quite frankly. That's all I can say about that.
Well, I mean, it's impossible. I can't see it being mischaracterized when, if you were to be derogatory towards him, which I'm not inclined to do, is that what he does is he whinges and he protests. Magnificently, might I add.
Yeah.
But if you zero it down, the freedom of speech, taking direct personal responsibility for yourself, your circumstances, your future, your family life, your socioeconomic status, your society at large, it all builds out from there. It irradiates outwards. That's just, it feels like common sense, but the number of people that are so, I mean, and people will say this isn't related to property. Well, this is related to property. For instance, Keir Starmer said recently that he would not consider a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats, which, you know, for those with a long enough memory will remember, or those who have got student debt still will remember the absolute calamity of clusterfuckery that took place by those two people shaking hands. I mean, talk about the most backstabby person on human earth, you know, Nick the Pleb Clegg, who completely took every single student in the country, bent them over without any KY, and royally fucked them. And this is it. And people say, well, that doesn't impact property. Well, how many people do social housing? How many people do student HMOs?
Yeah.
How many people are doing refurbs for starter homes where people can't afford it? The impact on conversations like this and how it changed the face of property is 100% integrated, connected, and linked. And even talking about the free ports, I mean, we've talked about that a couple of times. Even talking about personal responsibility. I mean, you've had some absolute bellends go on record. Politicians say, well, if you don't have your avocado toast, you could buy yourself a property. Well, that is absolutely, completely fucking ridiculous to even use it as an utterance. I have to say it to point out how fucking stupid it is. And I feel like an idiot for having to say it and then say it's stupid for saying it. But the reality is, you know, looking at the economy, looking at society, looking at all of these things impacts housing, impacts investment, impacts how money moves around the country, where it stops, why it's stuck there, you know. Yeah, that's my rant.
You win.
I'm going to listen every week now.
Wow. Okay. I feel like we're going counterclockwise with the ranting. My turn.
Your turn.
No, I'll save it for another time. Helen, you go.
Oh no, I can't live up to that. I think that was.
We've got some fabulous comments going on
today.
So
it's like a rain of comments. I think everyone's enjoying the chat on all different channels that we are broadcasting to. Going back to AI, Yasmin is saying the most important is to change education, not to teach our children useless subject. That would be absolute. Well, here's another rant. We need to teach children how to think and how to ask the right questions and critical thinking instead of still learning by heart dates of battles, or for that matter, many other subjects that AI spells out in seconds. ChatGPT gives us better responses if we ask better questions, but as you all said, we still need to use our critical thinking capabilities.
Talking my language, Yasmin. Well, talking my language. Critical
I don't know
thinking.
Which LinkedIn profile you're looking at this on, Yasmin, but I think we should be friends because that's brilliantly put. That is absolutely brilliantly put.
Yeah.
This coming from Gordon Thompson. I'm sure, like everyone else, I've never known a time when professionals are overworked and just take too long. So if AI helps, then more power to AI. Yes,
it makes a lot of sense because you do certainly get a lower quality of service over a longer period of time since the pandemic in professional services. You know, so it'll be interesting to see where we feel that first in property, whether that's in conveyancing, for example, where there are obviously quite a lot of things that can be done by AI, including reading things particularly quickly. You know, ordering searches, except all that sort of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Quasi's been particularly active today. Star for Quasi for the most active listener today. This is about purpose-driven creatives and impact investors. I'm a creative, but I think entrepreneurially. We're creating platforms in commercial real estate space as the common denominator for community impact investors, and where we make what was thought of as investable becomes investable because you're connected on purpose.
Yeah, community spaces is actually, you know, there was a lot of that it just isn't around anymore. There are no longer those, youth clubs, those community spaces, and I think the loss of those and the lack of those has certainly been felt. So depending on what direction you're taking that in, Crazy, obviously you're quite generic with the comment that you made, but the reality is that commercial space now, and Adam mentioned it earlier on, the internet is the enemy for commercial space, give and take. So if you're able to create a space where it's a user experience led and or community space specific, then I think that is something that's got legs. I mean, you look at some of these old Debenhams buildings, if you can create a multi-use building with a community style centre, an experience-led space, and retail with some kind of food outlet, I think you're onto something really very special there.
Well, I think this is where you work into. This is what can happen, as Jay said, in terms of some of these retail parks that might be struggling. Although the out-of-town retail parks tend to do better than the high street, and that's been part of the problem, as we know. But you're talking towards the experience-driven economy, and then potentially some residential possibilities around that as well, because so much residential in high streets is poor quality, and there isn't really much residential around these out-of-town places apart from the housing estates that already exist, but there might be some demand for some, and you're probably heading towards some of the logic that theoretically exists in what they're calling these 15-minute neighborhoods and all the rest of it in a way. And experiences will always endure, because experiences, even with virtual reality getting better and better and better, I'm not seeing virtual reality as this big pit that everybody gets pulled into and lives their life on a drip because virtual reality is so good. Maybe that's still going to happen one day. I don't know. But you're heading towards the kind of, religion is the opiate of the masses. And then Kennedy said, didn't he, that television is the opiate of the masses. I think it was Kennedy. And then it's actually there is an element of truth behind that. And if you do go more towards a universal basic income society, what becomes the opiate of the masses? A variety of experiences. So the cynic in me says, from a social fabric perspective, it might also be worth local authorities and central government being on board with quite a lot of this sort of stuff to make sure people live a more wholesome and rounded. And the thing is, if you raise, I suppose, going back to what Yasmin's excellent comment as well, part of the problem, as I see it these days, is we're raising children with a lack of resilience. And if we raise a society with less resilience, I really fear for it at the moment, because I see these kids going to university and being in a bubble until they go to university, and then they go to work, and then they deal with their first absolutely sociopathic boss or whatever, and it just breaks them, and they don't want to be in that environment. But perhaps that can be therapeutically removed from those angry executives by creating these fluffy bubble neighborhoods, and everything goes mega fluffy and all the rest of it. Although that won't be ideal when the next Vladimir Putin comes along. And I don't know how we even remotely try and solve that problem. I think, personally, we're going the wrong way on a lot of that sort of stuff. And grit and resilience and determination, and then by extension, therefore, individualism, are still really, really important in society. Just means we shouldn't be losing sight of people who do start from a place of... we've nearly got to equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. That's probably the full Peterson bingo card that's been achieved today, without even starting out with that.
I was just about to mention the decline of the meritocracy as part of the issue that we're facing. Then that really would have been a Yahtzee bingo / moment. Really,
but this is the thing, isn't it? With AI, we're really not, because as we've said already, a lot of the more wealth will be concentrated in the hands of fewer people. And if you effectively neuter the lower middle class, and maybe even the middle class, by all of these jobs being, replaced or taken out without a workable solution to some of those things, where does that leave us? What are you showing us there, Helen?
That's every time we mention his name, I'm going to show my picture. I'm going to get that printed out and play Peterson bingo. That's my Peterson bingo trump card every week now.
Amazing. Well, we got actually someone from in the Auction Buyers Club, and she's a developer, but she's also working now with this big charity, not big charity, but charity that takes kind of commercial buildings from developers who aren't planning, and those buildings are unused, and they are a massive liability for most of the developers because of the business rates. But when charity takes over the space, they're not liable for business rates, or they've got massive reductions in those business rates. And what they do is they create those unused spaces into like artist studios, and they just rent them out or make them available at really cheap rates. And I think it's an amazing project. So those buildings are used for maybe 2 years, and then the planning is implemented and they're being converted. But I think it's a really good way of what do you call it, like improving areas as well, because the more artists you've got, the more kind of trendy things become. And I think that's one of the things.
Wouldn't it be lovely to think that AI would improve the business rate system, because the system of charging is rubbish. It's anchored in the wrong place. It doesn't capture a lot of value from businesses where it could. It puts other businesses out of business because it lags too high on business rates. If you combined Google, and Google can monitor pretty much where everybody's phones are, and it knows how busy a place is by how many mobile phone signals are in there at that particular time. So it knows how busy your friendly local neighborhood cafe is because it knows how many mobile phones are in there, right? Then if you could put that together with business rates and make a better solution, you could tax more efficiently. Doesn't even mean raising more revenue, but it means not bumping certain industries and not giving certain other sectors unfair advantages. It would be complete genius. But of course, that will never happen because as already mentioned, the entrepreneurial, creative, visionary mindset is not working in the LA or in government at that level, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
That money could then be reinvested in order to propagate more of the sort of stuff we've just been talking about.
Brilliant, guys. I think we should stop, because if we talk too much, we won't have much stuff to talk about next week.
I reckon we'll probably be okay.
That's probably the most unlikely thing you've ever said. I want to see the evidence-backed data.
I need to find any reason to stop this chat. Okay, we've gone past our time. It's been amazing, and the amount of comments are really good. And thanks, guys, for this, because it makes the chat even more engaging and interesting. Anything else?
No, big thank you for everyone who's put some effort into interacting today. It's been brilliant to see some of those comments, and also makes us think quite a lot. So please keep it up and keep going, and give us a share if you're still watching. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
It's not all doom and gloom. Keep calm and carry on, and we'll be back next week.
See you guys.
You smooth old badger, you. Well played.